Hello, and welcome to our next presentation in the Jesus Cares Ministries training series for 2011 and 2012. I'm Jim Esmeyer, and I'll be our presenter for this evening, talking about the topic Augmentative and Alternative Communication. When Jesus was on this earth carrying out his public ministry, we learn in Mark 7, verses 31 to 37 as follows. There some people brought to him a man who was deaf and could hardly talk, and they begged him to place his hand on the man. After he took him aside, away from the crowd, Jesus put his fingers into the man's ears. Then he spit and touched the man's tongue. He looked up to heaven and with a deep sigh said to him, Ephphatha, which means, be opened. At this, the man's ears were opened, his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly. Jesus commanded them not to tell anyone, but the more he did so, the more they kept talking about it. People were overwhelmed with amazement. He has done everything well, they said. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. We further read in God's Word in Romans 10:13 to 14, For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. How then can they call on the one they have not believed in? And how can they believe in one they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? Now this verse addresses all people who need to hear God's Word, but the point is well made that people who have difficulty hearing and understanding and speaking need even more someone to preach to them or to share God's Word with them. And that, of course, is our responsibility. I believe that God continues to show his love by giving us ways to help the deaf hear and the mute to speak through augmentative communication. Now I'd like to have us take a look at a definition for augmentative communication. And I started out saying the title of the presentation is Augmentative and Alternative Communication. We're just going to boil it down to augmentative communication, and from time to time I'll refer to it as AC. So the definition we'll look at then says any system or device that helps a person express or understand language. Now for some reasons to use augmentative communication. In my experience, students with augmentative communication needs tend to be ignored, or at best are fringe students. I think the best thing we can do to try and understand the feelings that occur are to try and think how we would feel if someone ignored us, assuming that we didn't have an opinion or a response we wanted to share. I'm even afraid that in all too many cases we have trained nonverbal people to ignore their own opinions and feelings because no one really cares what they are. So we need to pay attention to people who are nonverbal and encourage them to participate. As a teacher concerned about learning, you need to get feedback to see what your students are learning. As you'll see later, it's not that difficult to do, but it does take a little more time. This brings us to the next point, which is that helping students who are nonverbal is more work. In fact, I would strongly recommend that you try to get a volunteer to work one-on-one with each student who is nonverbal. There are many good reasons for this. First, it saves you work as the classroom teacher. Secondly, the volunteer assigned to the individual who is nonverbal gets to know the student well and that person's idiosyncrasies. Finally, the rest of the class can learn from the student who is nonverbal. Who knows what insights any given student might have? We need to be willing to learn from them all. We'll take a look at the types of different augmentative communication right now, and we'll begin with sign language. And the sign language can basically be broken down into two types: finger spelling, which you see here, and we'll take just a little bit of time for you to look at those particular signs. It's interesting how some of them mimic the shape of the actual letter. But of course, it's the finger spelling that gets used quite often in connection with signs for individual words, especially when you're dealing with names. They pretty much have to finger spell it out, and that's what we have here. Then the other type is to deal with the actual words. And what we'll be presenting today is American Sign Language. There are different types, but I think the one that is the most popular, at least in the United States, is American Sign Language. So we'll look at some of the words as presented in the Jesus Cares songbook called Everybody Sing and Sign. And this, the teacher's edition, has a dictionary of signs. And you see there's a sign for prayer. And some of these are pretty easy. There is a description, a picture of it, and the written description of how to make the sign. And then in the songbook, the signs are actually over the key words. And so we recommend that you actually take the time to teach the signs with some of the songs. Probably the easiest song that everybody already knows the signs to is Jesus Loves Me. I wish that I had that song for you to show you, but that is not one of them in the songbook. I originally was not that excited about using sign language, especially with people with intellectual disabilities. But one Christmas service, I sat in back of a row of children, and when they saw our students doing the signing, they signed right along with them and got really quite excited. And I came to appreciate the motivation of using sign language rather than the people necessarily were using it for their main form of communication, but it seemed to reinforce the words for them and the learning of the words. Okay, there's also informal sign language, which is made up of homemade signs. And these are the signs that parents and caregivers develop just because they need something to communicate, and maybe they don't know the formal ASL language, so they make up signs. And it's really, really important for our teachers to get together with the primary caregivers and learn what these homemade signs are. And also gestures. It's of course super important to know ones like bathroom for obvious reasons. Okay, the next type of augmentative communication that we want to talk about is that of communication boards. And we're starting at the least level of sophistication, and a general communication board would be on paper or cardboard, and a good idea is to then have those sheets laminated so it makes them more durable. The particular one I'm going to show you tonight is from a fella who has his communication board literally tacked down to the tabletop that's affixed to his wheelchair. And I'd like to call your attention to what he has on the side. It says, "Please listen to me." And I think that speaks volumes in itself, that we do need to take the time to listen to folks that have these picture communication devices. Okay, it's also possible to work with a letter board. In other words, there would just be the alphabet on a sheet, and people could point to that. Now, you would have to be careful to make sure that the letters are spaced far enough apart and are large enough to allow the person to actually point to them so that you could understand. And of course, this pretty well requires the person to be able to spell for you to be able to understand what they're communicating. Okay, the next kind of pictures on a board that we're familiar with, and the one that I would like you to consider doing the most probably, are these sheets that have our Bible stories with the JCM word pictures put on them. Now, these JCM word pictures you will find associated with our Dear Christian Friend Bible study series. Each of the CDs have a collection of these word pictures that you can use to either make yourself, and here's where I would encourage, if you're making them yourself for the person that's assigned to working with the individual, that they be the one that makes these sheets. But you can also use these specific pictures with the next level, which we'll be talking about later, namely the electronic devices. But before that, I want to talk to you a little bit about a picture system called PECS. And if you would be working with any children, you would be sure to probably run across this because it's really very popular. And it's really quite a neat idea. The people go through 6 learning phases with this system. And the first thing they do is they get pictures for things that are very motivating for them. For instance, foods that they know they like, or a favorite toy, or a favorite piece of clothing. And the idea is that you literally take the picture off of these Velcro strips, which is on a page, and you hand that picture to a person who then gives you what you're asking for. And again, this is really good because it requires the individual to initiate the communication. And as they develop, they have certain bridge phrases that they tack on to the request. Like they'll have a card that says on it, "I want," and they'll put "I want" on the bottom here, and they'll build a sentence. "I want a cookie," or "I want this toy." And again, as they go through the various levels, research is finding that people are actually learning to verbalize through this system because it teaches them the concept of what it is they're trying to do. They're trying to get something and communicate a need. So we don't expect our classes to go out and buy a system like this, but you may run across it with some of your students, and as you're going to hear me encourage quite often, that you contact the speech therapist or work with the speech therapist who might show you how to work with these various systems. Okay, the next thing I'd like to show you that helps people make communication boards easier or quicker is this software program from Mayer Johnson Company called Board Maker. And the Board Maker has a lot of templates in it. And it easily lets you find pictures out of a library, and you can add pictures to the library. So theoretically, we could put our JCM Word pictures into the library of this software, and you could easily pull them out to make the pictures in your own template that you preloaded into the software. And then you can see here that it also even makes little books that are very motivating, especially for children. But again, this is something that could be used with our classes. And again, it's something that a school system might have, or a speech therapist might help you become involved with it if the speech therapist has it. But again, it's not something that we would encourage you to go out and purchase. Okay, now we're going to go into the devices that personally I think are absolutely fabulous in terms of how much they enrich the lives of the individuals. The paper and cardboard communication boards are one thing, but to get involved with these electronic devices is a whole new level. And with the advent of the iPad and other tablets, we see that these devices have really caught on. I find it a little amusing, especially when it seemed like every day there was some kind of an article or a feature on television about how the iPad could be used as a communication device for people with speech needs, and especially people with autism. And they acted like we've never had anything like this before, but dedicated electronic devices have been around for a long time, but it's interesting to see how it's suddenly being greeted with new enthusiasm. And one of the reasons I think we have this enthusiasm is, first, these devices are cool. I mean, it doesn't draw any negative attention to you if you're carrying around an iPad. But if you have some of the more dedicated devices that may look different, this can draw some potentially negative attention towards you, but not with the iPad. The other thing in the particular software that goes with this iPad, and by the way, the software that fits with an iPad quite often fits with an iPhone, and there are Android counterparts, so it's not just an Apple kind of situation. But can you imagine that you can carry around a smartphone and communicate with it? I think that's just tremendous. And the way this particular device works is these are like little file folders that have various categories in them. And so you can go into the category, you can pick a word. When you pick a word, it places it up on top, and it helps you spell out a sentence. And then when you click here, it literally reads the sentence for you. So in this one, this is the name of this software is called Pull a Quote to Go, and it's, of course, an augmentative and alternative communication in your pocket is what that would read. And then this one would be I want blueberries. So again, these are just quite ingenious, and they can be programmed. And these are the kind of devices that I just cannot encourage you enough to work with speech therapists that work with your students. And if your students don't have a speech therapist, I would strongly encourage you to work with the caregivers to try to get them one, working with your county services, and help people communicate. Okay, the next category is that of dedicated devices, and by this we mean with the tablet, you can do all sorts of things. You can get on the internet, you can play music, you can use it as a camera, just anything you can do with a computer, you can pretty much do with these tablet devices and even the smartphones. But on the dedicated devices like a Dynavox, that basically is dedicated toward communication. Now, I want to tell you some irony. In doing the research for this presentation, I discovered that you can get Medicaid to pay for a dedicated device like a Dynavox and others I'm going to show you. And these run up to $8,000, and they'll pay 80% of that, Medicaid, that is. But for, excuse me, my goodness, for the iPod, they will not pay for it at this point in time, and that is a $500 device. And the smartphones are even less than that. So it's really ironic. I guess the reason is that the dedicated devices have gotten a label of being a medical device, and the iPad has not reached that distinction yet. And of course, they're concerned that people are going to cheat and say, hey, this is pretty nice to get an iPad, and they don't really need it for communication. But anyway, let's look at some of these dedicated devices, and I will show you some of the advantages to those. Okay, this is their model that they call the Maestro, and it's quite versatile. It also has the categories and the pictures that you can add to them. Now, as you'll see in some of the other devices, and I'm pretty sure you can do it with the Dynavox, is you can use various switching devices that allow people to even use focusing their eyes toward a particular picture, and it will activate that. So that is definitely one of the advantages for a dedicated device like the Dynavox. Okay, and I've got a few more different makers of these similar kinds of devices. And we'll show you the different kinds. This is one called Go Talk 20 Plus from the Attainment Company. And here we see one. It's basically a text-to-speech device. You type the text and it says the words. Well, of course, you have to have quite a higher intellectual ability to spell and have that work for you. Then there are different devices, again, to trigger activating the various dedicated devices. Okay, here's another one that spells things out and reads it, but this one has a feature that they refer to as predictive software, and basically it guesses the next word that you want to put in there. Here's a different type. Again, basically highlighting the picture boards, and this one has less pictures, so it's would be less complicated. And then here again are some of the switching devices for people probably with cerebral palsy that have difficulty controlling a mouse. They can use a device like this. And finally, this shows a gentleman who is using a eye control way to activate the individual little blocks on the screen. I was at the Eisenhower Center, a place where I was formerly employed. They serve people with cerebral palsy, and they told me that a device like this, that one of the people they have, costs $23,000. So of course that's a lot of money, but again, when you stop and think, how much would you price would you put on your tongue? Mine is pretty valuable, so it's such an important aspect in their life that we really need to pay attention to it. Okay, now I'd like to talk a little bit about facilitated communication. I would say this was really popular about maybe 15 to 20 years ago. And what they found was that an individual whom they called a facilitator could support the arm or the hand of a person who had impairment in their communication, And this communicator could type information that revealed that they had a much higher ability than expected. And this was used a lot with people who have autism. And of course people would say, I knew he was learning how to read on his own, and look, he can do it, and this, all we need to do is support his arms and he'll type away and communicate with us, this knowledge that he's assimilated. Well, the only problem is that most professional associations feel that it's the facilitator who's influencing the outcome of the communication. And inadvertently, without necessarily trying to do it, they are guiding the individual to type what the facilitator wants them to type. And they've done all kinds of research studies on this, and there are a few that do tend to support it, but most of them do not. And one of the really big problems associated with this was that people were accused of abuse. Parents and caregivers were accused of doing some pretty horrible things. And yet most of these allegations were not proven. And facilitated communication, as I understand, is not accepted in a court of law. Now, here's my take on this. There are an awful lot of things that are controversial in the intellectual and developmental disability field, and especially in the field of autism. There are just all sorts of claims that diets and parabolic chambers and all sorts of things can improve the capabilities of people. And personally, I don't get into arguments with people. I say, if you have the money and you want to try it and you realize that there isn't research to support it, but you want to see if it works with your family member, that's your personal decision. I'm not going to tell you not to do it, but I am going to tell you to go into it with your eyes wide open. Okay, I want to quickly tell you, though, a story that I personally encountered. There is a pastor that I worked with who really believed in facilitated communication, and he provided confirmation instruction to a young man. That man was confirmed and takes communion to this day, and he feels that he gave adequate answers to the training that he was receiving, and it was all done through facilitated communication. So again, I'm not going to question individual people who are working with people on an individual basis. It's out there, and you need to know about it. Okay, now, although this isn't a presentation on the deaf and hard of hearing, it is in the area within augmentative communication, and there very well may be people in your classes who are hard of hearing. So I went to our people in the Wells Ministry for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, and they gave me a booklet called I Can't Hear You. It's a booklet that you can get yourself from them. And they had some tips in there that I want to quickly share with you. I'll go through them kind of quickly. But before I do that, I do want to tell you, this is a little story that Pastor Miller told me. He had a deaf student in his confirmation classes, and he had an interpreter in the congregation who worked with that student, and the student was confirmed and was examined with the rest of his class, and he was able then to answer his question or questions by signing the answers, and the interpreter shared it with the congregation. And I guess it was one of those just absolutely thrilling moments for both Pastor Miller and the congregation. And again, such a worthwhile activity to do. Okay, so here are some tips. People who are deaf and hard of hearing need to see your face. Well, here's another anecdote from Pastor Miller. And for those of us who know him and didn't know him back then, he used to have a mustache. And he had that mustache until somebody who was a lip reader told him to please consider shaving it, because it was really difficult for him to read Pastor Miller's lips. And and understand what he was trying to say. So Pastor Miller did shave his mustache, and that was great that he did that to facilitate his communication. Okay, so the speaker's face also should be well lit, so you don't want to be in the shadows. This seems so obvious, but something I think we could easily forget, and that you want to get the person's attention before you speak. You want to keep your body still. Again, if people are lip reading, that's difficult for them. Don't turn away or cover your mouth, and don't chew gum. That really drives people nuts who are trying to lip read. Speak naturally, don't exaggerate, and then rephrase instead of repeating the same words. And don't yell. It just distorts the sound if the person's wearing a hearing aid. And I want to speak a minute about hearing aids. My colleague Bill Trubenbach and I have a friend who, boy, a couple years ago just was having fits with his hearing aid. It would make a screechy, loud sound, so he was really hesitant to turn it on. And I think what was discovered was it made that screechy sound when he needed to change his batteries. And so it was really a challenge for him to keep up with everything that he needed to do to keep his hearing aid functioning. And I'm saying this because, again, if you have somebody in your class who uses a hearing aid, first thing you might want to do is check and make sure he's got it on. And you might get into things of being concerned about batteries and so on. But the hearing aid is something that, from what I hear, just keeps getting better and better. They're finding they're using digital ways to really perfect these devices. Okay, beware of sounds in the background. Again, hearing aids amplify all sounds, and so it can really be a problem for the individual. And then I think this is really a neat idea, and it can apply not only to people who are hard of hearing, but to anybody in our class who has trouble learning. The more impaired individual, the idea of letting the people who are hard of hearing go second or third so that they can see others model the required behavior. I think that's just a really neat idea. And then, as with any person with a disability, don't spoil them, adding possible behavioral problems to the ones they already have. They don't need any more extra problems. So you need to require them to do follow the rules and everything as you've set down for everybody else. Okay, there are resources. Again, the Wells has a ministry for the deaf and hard of hearing. They have a website, and the head of that program is Dean Wygund, and Dean is more than willing to help you answer questions or provide resources. Here are some of the resources. We always like the reasons why deaf people are excused from church. You might apply that to people with any disability, and when you open the book up, it's blank. There are no reasons why people are excused from church. They have Easy Bible Lesson CDs, which I'll show you in a minute. They also have a song book. They have a coloring book for disability awareness. They have the Lord's Prayer poster that they'll give you free that illustrates signing the Lord's Prayer. And of course, they have offering envelopes. And again, from time to time, our various Bible classes do collect offerings, and that's a pretty nice mission to consider supporting with the students' gifts. And then they have a CD called Open to All, and they also have a newsletter called Open to All that you can receive. Okay, and then just quickly showing you from their Bible lessons. This is the picture of a good shepherd. And then I'm going to skip. There's actually two pictures. The lesson is written in two levels. This is the simpler lesson, and I think it's pretty good. I think it could definitely be used in our classes as a different curriculum over the years. And again, their CD is $10 for 30 lessons. You can't beat that. And then they have a lesson plan that comes along and gives you some ideas to enrich the lesson. Okay, now we're going to get into actually teaching people with alternative and augmentative and alternative communication needs. Okay, I'd like to talk about the staff. You're going to have your regular classroom teacher, and then remember, I really recommend you having a one-on-one volunteer, and I would kind of call that person an advocate. I mean, they may have to really stand up for the individual in terms of dealing with resource people to make sure the person they're helping gets what they deserve. And I think this person can be trained to serve the student. They would be the people that would consult with the speech therapist and others who might help as parents and caregivers. And that individual might want to consider taking a special class. If they get interested and it's appropriate for sign language, money is available through the Wells Ministry on Deaf and Hard of Hearing. They will pay for specific courses in sign language. Okay, and I would see that volunteer as, again, preparing the materials needed and coordinating with the speech therapist, and then assisting the student as needed, positioning the material, and providing prompts. Okay, now in teaching the lessons, and I'm kind of making an assumption that people will be using our premier Bible story material that Jesus Cares Ministries developed called Dear Christian Friend. And again, those lessons, those sets all have the Jesus Cares word pictures. Okay, as you present the lesson, I recommend that you display the word pictures as you tell the story. And you can do this if you're accustomed to using flannel graph. You could still present one of these pictures. So I would blow up the little pictures, the JCM word pictures, to tell the story. Now, Jesus told a story about a father who had 2 sons. Now, while you're holding up the pictures and perhaps you're placing a piece of flannel, a flannel character on the board, the assistant can be helping the individual find that picture on their communication board, or perhaps that you're working from a lesson sheet and they would help the person find that picture on the lesson sheet. Okay, and again, these are the communication boards that I'm talking about. So the assistant would help the person find the picture of Jesus who told a story about a father who had 2 sons. Okay, so we want the individual with communication needs to be familiar with the pictures as the stories are being told, or as the story is being told. Okay, next, we want the teacher to ask questions while teaching the lesson, and I think this is a common methodology that teachers do. They stop and they ask a question about what was presented earlier, and I'm simply saying don't forget to include the student with AAC needs. Stop in front of the individual and say, who told a story to the people? And then they would point to the picture of Jesus, and you'd get some feedback and know that the person was with you and understanding. But I'm also saying on those communication devices that they have the ability to ask questions also. And so I'd like you to make sure that you allow for enough time, or maybe the assistant helps present the question to you. Okay, there are just a few other things I want to mention before we close. The Wells also has a mission to the blind, and I just want you to know that there are recorded devotions. They have a lot of things recorded, and even though we're not talking about the blind necessarily in our classes, but if you had somebody who's higher level, higher intellectually functioning person, but they couldn't read necessarily, they could still get a CD, a free CD or a tape, and these meditations would be on there. And so I just want you to know that's available as a supplement to the total religious training that you're providing the individual. And finally, I would ask if there's any questions. Please feel free to either open up your mic, or if you end up typing in the chat box, that would be okay too. And if there aren't any questions, and again, you can feel free to, if you're listening to this and watching this as a recorded entity on the website, you can still send questions in to us, and we would be happy to answer them. Okay, and with that, we're going to share with you the coming attraction on March 27th. We are going to be sharing success stories. So I'm hoping that the Bible classes, you'll be able to learn from what other people are doing. And we really want to get our churches involved, especially the churches that have not been developing a program like Jesus Cares offers. And we hope if they see all the wonderful things that are happening literally around the United States, that's going to motivate the development of even more programs. And so with that, we say good night, and thank you very much for attending.